Hello everyone. It is Kenyon here, and I'm here to today talk about Coach Nurse and my thoughts about his tenure on the Raptors and whether or not I think that the Raptors made a good decision. Um, his part to blame in the season, and I'm going to make a couple other videos after this, but I wanted to make some solo videos, including this one, to discuss the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly in certain parts of our roster and organization. And so today's video, like I said, going to be about Coach Nurse. So let's just get right into it. I made just a couple of notes about it. So let's just start into the good. I think Coach Nurse came here and he won a championship. And I think anytime you win a championship, you deserve a certain level of praise, regardless of anything else that happens. I think as a strategist, as an X's and O's coach, as they say, I think he did a phenomenal job when he was here. Um, Overall, I think that as a strategist, sometimes, especially if you win early on in these type of situations, there comes a time where you get stuck on, my way one and my way, not necessarily my way or the highway, but you get stuck in a certain pattern of thought. I've seen it with other creators, I've seen it with other things, and it's natural. It's a human thing where, you're successful in this one thing, this worked, so this is going to work again. The problem is that we didn't really have the roster around it. But before you get into that, again, I think that there was some good things, specifically this year. Now, I do think that there could have been more ball movement, but I think that the way that we played is at least in part because of roster construction. I think the way that Nurse designed the way that the roster was playing was partially because of roster construction. So before I get into the questionable or the bad parts of it, I wanted to outline that. I think if you look at Nurse, right, and you think about it, I see Nurse as someone where we didn't have a lot of shooting or shooting talent on this roster. And he kind of outlined it at the beginning, the starting press conference. He said, look, we're going to have to win on effort. They played the possession game, and they played it pretty well. When they did, they won. They won enough games. They didn't do it consistently because that can be very exhausting. Now, I think that that's a good segue into the questionable decisions of Nurse. He put an over reliance on the starters' minutes. I know I've seen people go back and forth about whether or not Pascal played. He has played the most amount of minutes out of any. Like at least he's top five over the past 3 years consistently. Um, Now, on one hand, you gotta say thank goodness Pascal. And this is not a Pascal video per se, but thank goodness Pascal didn't do a lot of AAU and picked up basketball late in life because there's less mileage on his body. He can handle the minutes without his body breaking down by comparison. Now, obviously, I think it depends on the person, but I think every machine, every body, or whatever has its breaking point, and sometimes that's cumulative, sometimes it's not cumulative, but you get the point. I think so. He over relied on starter minutes, even when people would be getting back from injury and be on minutes restrictions. You'd see them play 30, 35 minutes, which is crazy. It's partially out of necessity. Okay. Um, I think both management as well as Nurse almost committed malpractice against guys like Barnes. If you don't like Siakam, sure, Barnes shouldn't have been playing that many minutes. Siakam, Fred, um, obviously, I feel like Fred should have probably, by his own admission, he said, I had an option to get surgery, and I opted to not do the surgery, and I thought that that was a mistake. Um, I'll get into that in another video, though. But playing your starters Thibodeau levels of minutes is tough. Um, that brings me to the bench. He didn't really play the bench consistently. Now, if you look at a per game basis, yes, you'll see, okay, Koloko played 13 minutes, Flynn played 13 minutes or whatever, right? The problem is that wasn't consistent. Now, part of it was injuries. I think if Otto Porter was healthy, I think that Otto Porter probably would have played significantly more minutes. Um, he was playing around 18 when he was healthy, and here for those 8 games. So I think again, I think it's fair to assume that he probably would have played a significant part in the rotation and helped keep minutes down on other guys. But there was other things where, okay, we got Pirtle, okay, regardless of people's thoughts on Pirtle, and I'll discuss that in my Masai video. Um, I've discussed certain things on Pirtle in the past, but yeah, you look at, okay, you can get minutes down on at least 3 of your guys because they don't have to play as many center minutes. Okay, why is Koloko not playing at least until he's fouling out? Right? Koloko went to the G League. I thought it was a good decision. Why leave him in the G League for that long? Why not play him against teams like Miami, where early in the season you played well, and he played well against Miami. He played well against the Bulls early in the season. So it's not like you can't say, oh, he you wouldn't know if he would have done well or bad. He did do well early on. So at least play him for those. It was not necessarily the per game when they did play, but it was the consistency of literally game to game. Am I going to play? I think NBA players are creatures of habit. They've talked about this. Some people need to wear the same socks or whatever, or they'll wear shoes if they have a good game. They'll wear it again, etc., etc. So I think with that being said, he made some mistakes. The other thing is that with Doughton, if you like the guy and you have limited minutes or games that you can play this guy, and you think that he's going to impact the rotation positively, why play him for like 6 minutes when you have a limited amount of games that are coming down to the stretch? Play the guy, see what you have. And to that point, I think that Nurse did not play the bench because he felt like the bench was not worthy of being played. There's a lot of things that happen in practice that we don't necessarily see. And this is not trying to diss any player or whatever, but it is just, this is how it works, right? Like, there are, and I will get into the bench in another video, but there are, in my opinion, it's clear to me, and it should be clear to anyone who's watching the playoffs, that yes, I do think that we have some talent on the bench, but at the same time, we have a lot of redundancy. And I think also beyond the redundancy, I think it's fair to say that some players haven't worked out. Not going to blame that on the player. Not necessarily. It could be the system. It could be that player in another situation would be better. Don't need to go and focus on names today before making a different video about the bench. But I think it's fair to say that's why he probably didn't play them. Now, in my opinion, that's playing the game of chess wrong. If you think that they suck, flat out, then what you should be doing is you need to play the players to prove to management that these players are not going to lead to winning. I think Nurse has a habit of, from what I've learned from my sources, when he was in the G League, he had a habit of focusing just on his resume and on winnings above all. And sometimes to the point of creating a tumultuous work environment. I'm going to now focus on the bad, because I think that, I've given a little bit of credit to Nurse. I think I've given, obviously, I think he has had moments where he has coached this team closer to its ceiling. And I'm not necessarily, by the way, I will talk about the direction of the team at some point. I don't necessarily think that we need to keep everyone in the core, but I also don't think that you need to do a complete rebuild. But I'll get into that. I'll probably do one starter video and one bench video. Okay, so the bad. Masai talked about selfishness, right? And I think Samson Folk, if you are watching this channel still, said it really well. He articulated it really well. I think get away from like the on-court play and all that kind of stuff for a second, and projecting, one's own, like trying to figure out these players from that standpoint. I think if you look at it this way, media tours are bad. especially for an organization that never leaks, never talks about these things, keeps everything in house. Media tours are bad, and then on top of that, gaslighting. The own media that you leaked information about your own situation for. I mean, if you compare it to Becky Hammond, where they were asking her about her future, and she said it was like the complete opposite, and it's what you're supposed to do. It's like, no, I'm focused on the situation at hand. Now, some people will say, hey, that's nurse, you know, kind of throwing a tantrum or protesting or whatever, and it probably is. Maybe it is. I don't think that it puts him in a good negotiating position. I think, actually, to be honest, here's my hint towards my Masai video is I think anytime you've seen people leak things in the media or talk too much about internal problems, they've been gone fairly promptly and been removed fairly promptly when the situation allows for it to be an easy removal. Um, Justin Champagny is a good example where he was complaining about his situation, made a post, he was gone right away. There's been other players as well in the past, so I'm not going to go through every single thing throughout this nurse tenure. But yeah, I think he should have played the players. That's without saying. And I think he was inconsistent with holding players accountable. Um, we never really saw him hold Fred accountable on a regular basis and hold Fred to his role. This dates back to the book, and I will probably put the page. You know, I put it out on online, and it kind of blew up. But I'll toss it out again in terms of what he said about Fred VanVleet maybe holding onto the ball a little bit longer, or bringing up the ball instead of giving it to other people. Um, I think the thing is that sometimes coaches and even people, they see themselves in other people. Say you had a tough childhood. Well, Fred had a tough childhood, so or maybe the bet on yourself. Well, you know what? Hey, I'm not a bet on yourself type person. I'm really not. Never really vibed with that mantra. There's nothing wrong with it. But I'm just saying that some people have said, hey, I vibe with that. I mean, the problem with that mantra is it can be seen as kind of a zero sum, and I don't think that life needs to be a zero sum game. But that's a whole other thing. But back to Nurse, I think when you're only holding one guy accountable, I mean, he had a blow up with Siakam. Since then, he hasn't really said anything about Siakam. But he's not had tiffs, but he's publicly called out a lot of different players in the media. And what concerns me about this, and this is again the bad part, is I think as a coach you need to be relatable. I think you need to be better than just, hey, my thing knows best. His mentor is Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson was a good coach when he was a coach, and then he got stuck in the triangle, and making everyone fit into the triangle. Well, I think that Nurse got stuck into his system, and when he didn't have the people to fit that system, well, you have to work harder or you have to make it work. Again, a lot of times you would hear people say, players like Gary, I'm probably going to put that on the screen right about now.
You mentioned your defense.
A couple times.
What is that like for you, for the team? How are those things received when they're not just said behind closed doors, but to us?
Yeah, you just take it on the chin. For me, people use it for different purposes. It may affect them differently. It would just motivate me, to be honest with you. Again, whatever comments are going to be said, it's going to be said. I'm going to go out there and try to play and help my teammates, to any way I can to get a win, but you don't really think about it too much. Obviously, you hear it, you see it, you probably going to report it, but, that's about it.
Does it change when it's said to you, not to us? Said to you privately compared to when it's said to us publicly?
That's the thing. Usually, half the time or most of the time, it's not. I don't hear it until you hear it. So I didn't. I wouldn't know that it was an issue or a problem until you put it out there.
Gary said the first time he heard something about his play was from the media, just like them. Now, some people might say, well, I don't know if I believe Gary, or maybe Gary's a bad listener. I don't know. It's possible. Um, it's hard to say. What I would say is that I'm going to actually side on the side of Gary. And Gary was fairly professional with how he conducted himself. And yeah, sometimes the way that you outline things to people or hint to things isn't always the best. And maybe it wasn't taken well. I don't know. But at the same time, I have to go based on what Gary said. And if Gary's saying the first time he's learning about a problem is through the media, that's not a good look. It's definitely not a good look. And that's the type of thing where it's like you should be doing that in person. Maybe that should be your last resort. Maybe if you're going to do a passive aggressive thing like LeBron, like that should be a last resort. It works in some cases, but it can grind on people. And even the system that he created in terms of offensive and defensive, it grinds on people. Now, here's my final thought on Nurse as I'm wrapping this one up because I think it's getting a little long. If you look at the Nurse coaching tree, Nurse coaching tree has actually struggled a little bit here and there with with getting along with players. So Nate Bjorkgren basically had a damn near mutiny half a season in on the Pacers. That's not good, right? Chris Finch, we just saw him in the playoffs, had some questionable decision making. I've seen plays this year where I saw the it was against Minnesota. The plan was to get Scotty the ball. Fred wasn't doing it. Sure, people can argue about like whatever, sure, but he wasn't. Called a timeout. Next time, it's same guys are on the floor after the timeout, except Fred's not handling it. Siakam is. Siakam passes it to Barnes. It was like, okay, if this is really that big of a problem, right? And I'm not here to say this person's selfish or this person's saying no. That's we can discuss the potential chemistry issues that were on the court in a different video. I think at the end of the day, like if that's clearly a problem and a player is not like passing the ball, or if you're not getting the ball to your best player or at least the hot hand, whether it's Barnes, whether it's Siakam, whether I don't care who, okay? It could be Fred. But if you do not have the hot hand, you need to give it to the hot hand. You need to feed the hot hand. It's like at bare minimum, you need to do that. And if you're not doing that, then you need to, or if the players aren't doing it, as a coach, you need to at least find a way to encourage that to happen or facilitate that. Last thing is role definition. I think he did an awful job of that. Now, part of this is on management. Management will signal certain things to players, or they should, or you should have a sit down. I don't think that was had. I think that there was a lot of assumptions made coming into this year. So when I say that Nurse, I'm not surprised that Nurse was let go, but I was okay with him coming back. This is all the reasons why. But I also think it was kind of time for him to go for a number of other reasons. I think when he went on the press tour, quote unquote, or whatever, with like 5 things left in the season, I was like, it's done. Like at that point, like I was done with it because I'm like, whatever he has done, positive, it was now erased away because there was no reason for that to come up. And then for you to double down and act like it wasn't you that brought it up, that's a big problem. Yeah, I think it was time to let it go. And I think the only thing that I'll say that is unfortunate is that Nurse gets tied to certain players. I think some of it is fair. I think him and, he has been tied to Fred. I think that's more fair than him being tied to Pascal. And if you go back and watch every single player's interviews, or exit interviews, I should say, there was only really one player that gave him a vote of confidence, and that was Fred. Didn't give the system a vote of confidence, but he gave Nurse a vote of confidence. Every other person was either non-committal. No one threw him under the bus, but everyone else was kind of non-committal. And I think that was very telling. And so I'm not here to say like what percentage Nurse played in terms of creating this. I think also you heard of toxic work environments. You heard certain people being left out of road trips. There was issues between him and Earl Watson, and sort of certain cliques within the coaching staff. I think you clean house and you find an outside candidate if at all possible. AJ Griffin seems to be absolved of that, so I can understand the organization keeping AJ Griffin. But I think everyone else, you for the most part, outside of Big Cat, of course, shout out to Big Cat, you let go from a coaching staff standpoint and you start afresh, whatever that means. I will get into my thoughts on coaching um, in another video, probably with either I almost said Coach Roach, or someone else. It might be a solo video, but yeah. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts. Just kind of like impromptu thoughts on the whole situation. I'm sure that there's things that I missed. I did make a post in the Facebook group. I may link that down below. Just about the nurse coaching tree and how sometimes it's been a little bit problematic. I think it's not all nurses' fault. I think he wasn't given the right toolbox. I think that is very fair to say. But with that being said, I do think that Nurse does deserve his fair share of the blame for why the season looked like it did. And as Masai said, it didn't look fun to watch. It wasn't fun to watch at parts of times. And personally, I started watching the season in 5-10 game increments, saying I'm not going to worry about the standings. I'm just looking at the next 5-10 games because otherwise, the conversation around the team got toxic. Now, with that being said, I'm going to say this final thing. Obviously, if you like this conversation or if you have thoughts, comment down below, like, subscribe if you haven't, hit the notification bell, of course. Yeah, I think that in some spaces, not all, the conversation around the team became really negative and toxic these years. And I want to just remind people, I don't know when you as an individual became a Raptors fan, but Raptors have been through tougher times than this. We will be fine. I think there's a lot of bright side, and I don't think that you have to do any knee-jerk reactions. This is a bit of a game of patience, and I think the one thing that I will say, and again, I will get into Masai in a future video, but the one thing that I will say is this. Masai was right about one thing. There are more people to deal with in the offseason. We just saw Memphis go out, and they probably regret not going harder after OG Anunoby. There's a couple other teams that probably regret not making more fair and real offers over some of the assets that were reportedly on the trading block. So I think we'll be fine. Obviously, there was issues with the Masai side of things, I think, this year. And when I say Masai, I mean Masai and Bobby in terms of decision making and kind of not necessarily moving forward on that. But I think Nurse is not completely absolved of his role to play in this year's outcome. So yeah, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed that. Let me know what you thought of Nurse this year, and I'll be seeing you at some point in the future. All right, peace.